I'm extremely excited to welcome my next guest back to the show. Del Bigtree, how are you, Del?
I'm really good, Jason. How are you doing?
I'm very well. It's excellent to see you again. Most people know, Del, that you've become one of the most prominent voices. I don't like to call it the anti-vax community because that
Thank
presupposes a lot of things. You're
you. Does.
pro-health, right?
Yeah. Pro health. I'm pro science. I'm pro choice. I the to call someone anti-vaccine. First of all, it's not a very good representation of me. It's not a very good representation of, I would say, the larger body of people that make up that so-called movement, which are, I call them more realistically, ex-vaxxers. These are people that absolutely believe they're doctors or and the process, and then either were injured themselves or watched a catastrophic injury to their own children, and that changed their course. And so to call them anti-vaxxer really misrepresents where they're at. I say that I'm not. I don't call myself an ex-vaxxer really because one of my biggest concerns with modern medicine, especially when we talk about vaccines, is we always hear this statement: the science is settled.
Right.
Vaccines are safe and effective. The science is settled, which, as you know, Jason, is the least scientific statement anyone can make.
Yeah.
But on that same note, if I was to say that I'm anti-vaccine, that means forever and always I would never take a vaccine, and there's no vaccine that can be safe enough. And there's basically, I'm saying my science is settled. And it's really, really not how I'm wired. I am wired to always keep an open mind. I would say that I have not seen a safety study of any of the vaccines that they're giving our children. Therefore, my children aren't going to get one of those vaccines. I also see a lot of science that shows the benefits of having childhood illness. But there is a chance. I mean, even if it's a 1 in a million chance or whatever it is, there's a chance there could be either an illness so terrifying to me that begins to sweep the world that I feel like that's a vaccine's my best option, or maybe there's a really safe vaccine that does go through a process. Or maybe, I was even interviewing Dr. Zach Bush, a guy that I think is really light years ahead of a lot of medical doctors and scientists that I've met. And when that guy talks about immunity, that there might be a way to boost the immunity in the future, I'd be open to seeing what that's about. But the main thing is I'm open. How do I expect to be able to have a conversation with someone that believes in vaccines? And I say to them, look, you can't say the science is settled. There's so much I want to show you. But then I say, but I'm unwilling to listen to your science, and where you're coming from. I just don't think good conversation comes from there. And I don't think evolution happens there. We need to all sit at the table, put our, opinions aside. And that's why a great conversation. You're very good at it. I've watched you in your debates with people. I actually really care what people have to say. I really care about what makes them tick. And I'd be the first one to say, you know what? I never actually thought of that. And that's sort of the beauty of people that enjoy debate. And that's, I think, what I am. I like the process.
And I'm glad you raised that point of settled science because it really is a term that comes from law. And what you and I are talking about today, as provoked by my initial conversation with world-renowned lawyer Alan Dershowitz, is this nexus of medical science and the law as it pertains to public health. Now, I think, Del, most people know you've got a very popular show on YouTube called The High Wire. You were the producer of the film Vaxxed, that has come under fire and been kicked off of Amazon.com by the truly objectionable Adam Schiff, who really needs to be
Yes.
investigated for his involvement with alleged meth kingpin and accused murderer Ed Buck, but we'll leave that conversation for another day. I wanted to talk to you a bit about your follow-up with Alan Dershowitz, which I thought was excellent. You and
Thank
he
you.
went into some depth about the points that he raised on my show last Saturday, where he said that the state has the power to plunge a needle into your arm. And I want to be very careful. We're not trying to attack Mr. Dershowitz. I just want to make sure that people aren't incited by the things that he's said, because we really are, not only from a medical standpoint, but from a psychological and economic standpoint, we're at an unprecedented place in our country's history. And I know a lot of people are in their homes really worried about the tremendous uncertainty of their health, their families, their economic situation. So I wanted to just go over a couple of key points that he raised that are just fundamentally wrong. Now, you raised some great issues. Professor Dershowitz's primary position is that the state police powers allow them to do things for the greater good. Now, you pointed out that a lot of these diseases affect, percentages of people where if we just leave them alone, that seems to be in the benefit of the greater good, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, exactly. And especially, I mean, COVID-19 is a very interesting case where it's not like, there's a whole argument of whether we compare this to the flu or not, right? Well, the death rate appears to be, in line with, I like a lot of what I've seen come out of Sweden. And the top scientist there put it well. He said, at first, I thought it was going to be just like the flu. He says, I think it's going to be like numbers are adding up when I look at the data from around the world. But you also have to add in the bloated numbers and how it's being diagnosed and how it's being written in death certificates. And you also have to look at the mishandling of the disease too and wonder if we really treated this the right way, where would we be at? All of those things. But really, one of the really interesting characteristics of COVID-19 that I brought up during that dialogue is the fact that it really doesn't affect children. That's not like the flu. I mean, we know your kid gets the flu and they got a fever, they're really sick. Instead, children, and there's been a real debate about this. Can they even catch it, or how many can catch it? Are they getting it? Are they asymptomatic? When we looked at China, right in the middle of Wuhan, where you had this incredible, virus apparently running through the place and killing lots of people, they're saying kids don't seem to be affected at all. So COVID-19 is actually very specifically different for children. It's nothing like the flu. It's so much less relevant and powerful, so much less powerful than the flu actually is. So it puts this conversation of greater good into a very interesting place, which I brought up that specific reason, that when you're saying greater good, are you saying for greater good for who? Because if you're the demographic that's actually, let me be perfectly clear, because you and I will both be taken out of context, right? And say, oh, they don't care about this group or that group. Let me be perfectly clear. For people that are over the age of 65, that have other comorbid issues, meaning they have life-threatening illnesses, there is a small group of people that have a very catastrophic, acute reaction to COVID-19. Their lives matter, of course, and we should do what we can to protect them. But we can call into questions all the ways we've tried to protect them and see if we really are protecting them. But what really bothers me is when the greater good argument, the death rate right now, as we see it by really multiple international studies now, is at the low point, 0.1%, and at the highest, right about 0.3%. And we're talking about multinational, agreement now or consensus around that idea. So this very tiny group of people, and to hear Alan Dershowitz saying he would force, everybody to get this, and people usually think especially children, right? Children already get vaccinated. Of course they would have to get this. They are the vectors for disease, right? We don't even know that that's true for COVID-19. But what I pointed out to him is, so you would be happy putting a child in an advanced risk position, actually increasing their risk, because the disease itself does not appear to be risky at all for children. And any vaccine does have some risk. So you're going to elevate the risk. So there won't be a greater good for the children, but for the greater good of those people that have already lived out their lives, that doesn't actually make sense to me.
Right. Yeah. And the problem that I had with Mr. Dershowitz's arguments is that he was basically mixing the concept of legal proof with medical proof. And, laws are the construct of man. We can understand every aspect of any particular law. We can even debate it until it is settled law. That's where that term comes from. And a bunch of lawyers have applied it to the field of science in the areas of immunology and climate change and things like that. You said it at the top of the conversation. It's anti-science to presume that it's settled. Someone could discover some new aspect of genetics or the universe that would unlock a whole new area of understanding. And any honest scientist or medical doctor would tell you that there is far more about the human body and the immune system that is not understood than what is understood. We also need to really take into consideration what is the legal definition of a vaccine. Because according to the CDC, it's a product that stimulates a person's immune system to produce immunity to a specific disease, protecting the person from that disease. Vaccines are usually administered through needle injections, but can also be administered by mouth or sprayed into the nose. So this is the type of stuff that would come into question in a legal argument about this, because the current vaccine that is in question, at least with regard to President Trump's Operation Warp Speed and the new vaccines that he's brought in, it utilizes a totally new technology. Isn't that right, Del? This messenger RNA?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I'm not sure. I actually believe we're being told there's about 100 different companies attempting vaccines for COVID-19. I think there's some of those companies going to take a more approach to, antigens or some part of the protein to be injected. But the leading contenders, and especially the Moderna vaccine, which has multiple patents owned by employees at NIAID who work directly with Anthony Fauci. And that is an mRNA vaccine. They have never, and by the way, they've been at this for, my understanding is decades at this approach, and no one has successfully brought it to market. It's being widely reported now that Moderna has never had a product brought to market yet. And you're right. This is, in many ways, depending on where someone's spiritual place is at, but I call this the God vaccine in many ways. This is where they're going to attempt to do things with a vaccine that really doesn't try to stimulate the body to react to something. It actually tells me what it's going to do. And some people could call that mutating cells and look, I want to be perfectly clear in any conversation that I'm just a reporter. I'm a medical journalist. I worked on the CBS talk show, The Doctors, for 6 years. I can read medical journals and glean most of what they have to say, but I go to science professionals to get a better understanding. I'm also not a lawyer, so my understanding of law, usually I run it by another lawyer. But, what I come to is the questions that I have. And I think that, what I represent is sort of everyman. What are the questions average people have? I like to ask those questions and go on my journey to learn the answers to that. And people get to experience that through me, through the high wire. But all that to say that my understanding of messaging RNA essentially is your DNA sends out RNA to, basically as messengers to your cells to explain to them, you need to create this protein or you need to protect this. So we are inserting really a message that the body or the cells are going to believe came from our own DNA, came from our source, or, it's a synthetic message that has been injected into the body. God knows what could go wrong.
Exactly.
There. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
Just from a scientific perspective, totally fascinating, and I get it, right? All right, go ahead, be fascinated. But to think that's what you're doing when you're putting what I keep saying is two of the most dangerous words I've ever heard in a sentence, virtually in every headline around the world, we're rushing the science. To rush science is really the stupidest thing mankind's ever done. And there's historical precedent set time and time again at how catastrophic the mistakes can be made when we rush science. But when we're rushing that level of science, where we're injecting synthetic messages that the cells think came from, our source, that is, let's just say, I can't imagine how many safety studies I would need to see and how I would have to have scientists explain to me exactly what is happening. Because they'll be the first ones to tell you, we're really not sure how it works, but in a couple of the animals, it looked like it worked. Right.
Yes. And now we've got, Dr. Fauci and others at state, public health organizations and within the government who are deciding what kind of tests can be bypassed. They've eliminated this animal trial, which seems very dangerous to me. I want to be clear to our viewers, Del, because we've got some questions coming here. People want me to ask you about the fallout, what it could be from an RNA vaccine. Neither Del nor I are doctors. Nothing we're discussing is intended to cure or diagnose or treat any disease. Everyone listening should not take any kind of medical action based on anything that we say. You've got to consult your own physician, and we can't answer questions like this. We're just raising questions that we as citizens of the country have about our own health, our family's health, and some of the things that are being proposed by the president and some of his advisors. I was watching just the other day, Del, a very interesting video here from a company called Precision Nanosystems. And this goes into some detail. Again, you'd have to be a scientist or a doctor to fully understand it. But as you just described, the messenger RNA is essentially the recipe book for our cells to duplicate themselves and do the things that they need to do for our bodies to function normally. And what this Moderna messenger RNA vaccine proposes to do, as you've pointed out, for the very first time in medical history, there is no body of knowledge of how this will work when introduced into humans. They want to, just as a virus does, a virus actually attacks your cells, inserts its own RNA, its own genetic recipe, and turns your cells into virus manufacturing factories. This is the functionality that causes the organs in the body to fail. What Moderna is proposing is they've mapped the COVID-19 RNA, and they're sending instructions to our cells to manufacture proteins under the idea that the immune system will then recognize these proteins and be able to defend us. And as you pointed out, this has never, ever been tested before. In the case law that Alan Dershowitz was referring to, this Jacobson v. Massachusetts, he was talking about a bit of settled law that was arrived at about some medical science that had been around for 109 years. The smallpox vaccine, which itself had certain safety issues, it had been around for 109 years. It had been administered literally to millions of people by the time they were having this discussion in 1905. So unlike the RNA vaccine, there was a large body of medical knowledge and debate over the safety and efficacy of this vaccine. And that knowledge, that consensus of scientific knowledge, allowed lawmakers to then make a vote as far as public safety based on what was understood by doctors. What do you think about what Alan Dershowitz said, where they're just going to test this thing for a couple of months and then he's going to decide if it's safe?
I mean, that's exactly the point of questioning that I went at with him. Like, how do you determine safety? And what is the legal ramifications if you're giving this vaccine to people that were not tested for safety? I mean, I pointed out, they've excluded anybody that's obese, anybody that has COPD, anybody that has, a heart condition of any kind, anybody that's on any drugs, anybody that's an alcoholic. I mean, we're talking about Top Gun here. We've got the best of the best that are being tested on right now. How does that represent the over 50% of Americans that are suffering from chronic illness right now as we speak, either heart disease, cancer, autoimmune disease? So we have no idea how this vaccine would work on them. What does RNA say to a body that's already has a malfunctioning immune system? These are things that, really weren't thought about. But I think the point you're making really is a good one. And I hadn't actually really thought about that. I mean, we could all talk about the problems with the smallpox vaccine, but you're right, it had been around for over 100 years. So this was something that really had a historical reference to how successful it was, what its percentage success rate is, and the value that they saw in the society. I'm not sure I still agree with the ruling, but you cannot compare that to a product that we are clearly all going to be human guinea pigs in. We have no idea. As Alan Dershowitz so perfectly put himself when I talked about children, he's like, well, we have no idea if there's some long-term effect from having COVID-19 in children or people that we won't see for many, many years. I said, I'm really glad you brought that up, Alan, because it's exactly true for the vaccine. We don't know how this vaccine is going to affect us years from now. We don't know what is triggering. If RNA messages, do they stop making the message? What if it just keeps making those messages? What if it's an atom bomb? What if the atoms keep splitting and they never stop? Then you don't just isolate the attack in one place. We all die, right? This is science, and this is science we don't understand. We have no idea. We're spelunking in the immune system in places we've never been before, and only in one specific type of immune system, right? Very healthy people, or as the definition you described, right, by the CDC, that it goes after a specific virus, targets it. Okay,
Right.
we already have 30 mutations of this virus. Okay, does it handle all 30? Is it only focused on one? I assure you, it's really only focused on the mutation they're using in the laboratory right now. So what good is a vaccine in the end if it really is that target specific? And that really is where my research shows, and historic science shows you, that natural immunity, coming in contact with the illness yourself, gives you a far more broad immune response. You tend to be able to defend, for many people, against multiple strains, even other illnesses. There's people, they've shown that if you got flu, for instance, yourself, you are more likely to defend against coronavirus than those that get the vaccination for the flu. They end up having more complications from coronavirus. So that sort of specific targeting that the CDC brags about is one of the tragic flaws of the vaccine itself. But you're right. How can you compare 100 years of evidence to a product that we are rushing, has never been successful up to this point? And if there is success, we will only have seen success for a few weeks.
Right.
At the moment we start giving it to everybody. One size does not fit all. For instance, and you probably want to get a little more details here, but what we're hearing from Moderna, right? They're jumping up and down. We have 8 people out of 45 that had a robust antibody experience, as though, well, what happened to the other 37? And what about the 3 that you said appeared to have had a serious adverse reaction, right? Well, there's one of the arguments is saying, well, that was in the high dose group. The high dose group, 15 people, 3 of them apparently, needed some medical intervention. We don't know what. I don't know why we don't know what. I don't know why we're not getting more transparency. But if they're saying, well, it's the high dose, well, what is that out? It means it's toxic for somebody, and that means the dosing actually matters. And when we know how every vaccine on the planet works, a 350-pound man gets the same size vaccine as a 6-month-old, 7-pound baby. They've never changed the size.
Sorry to interrupt, Del. There's another aspect I wanted to bring up that you actually raised. You on another show with Bobby Kennedy Jr. that I was just watching this morning, and you guys brought up some additional excellent points. And we've got some questions in the comments right now that reminded me of this. We're talking about placebos. People are asking us about adjuvants in vaccines, mercury, aluminum. What we need to really help people understand is that, in this interview with Bobby Kennedy Jr., you talked about the lack of a double-blind placebo study and all that. Well, that's a type of scientific research that's based on these legacy vaccine technologies that may not even be an appropriate type of test for this new type of DNA vaccine. I don't know that a placebo could mess around with the DNA factory in your body. We might need a whole other type of testing. Obviously, placebos were invented at the same time that what our current understanding of pharmaceuticals were. And we're in a whole other, uncharted area here that is not well understood by scientists. It's definitely not well understood by lawyers and governors and people who are telling Donald Trump what to do. So I want people to really take a step back and absorb the message that we're trying to put out here. I really do believe we're in a whole new area here. An analogy I'd like to make with you, Del, in 1996, because of the advent of digital recording and the coming of the internet, the ability to distribute recorded material, whether it's music or movies or whatever, lawmakers determined that we needed some new laws to cover the commercial aspects of copying and distributing digital media. They came out with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And this changed significantly a lot of the laws that we all deal with now. I think that we are at a point, and this COVID-19 pandemic has really put us at a point where I believe we need a genetic Millennium Vaccination Act, and we need to review these 115-year-old judgments about 224-year-old treatments that have literally nothing at all to do with the proposed treatment. They didn't even know that DNA existed when the smallpox vaccine was created or when Jacobson v. Massachusetts was adjudicated.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point. They didn't know, how these things worked, what we were actually dealing with. I mean, you really just had, Edward Jenner just scraped some pus from a, cowpox and then said, oh my God, look, it looks like it might keep, milkmaids from getting smallpox. So maybe this will work. Pretty disgusting process. It had, it sort of was the birth of this whole vaccination idea. But you're absolutely right. It's a brand new world that we're in, and you cannot compare the two. And also, by the way, you can't compare the death rate either.
Right.
The compelling decision by the Supreme Court was with smallpox. Smallpox was freaking deadly. You know what I mean? I don't think anyone could deny it was an extremely deadly disease. Whereas, I think, I don't know what the numbers are, but I think they're in the 20-30% death rate of smallpox. And I won't be quoted exactly on that because I haven't referenced that material for a while, but we're talking about 0.1 to 0.3%, two totally different worlds, and something that I brought up with Alan. But I want to make something clear when you talk about the placebo thing, because I think there's some misunderstanding about placebos and vaccinations. And I do actually think that process can still work even with modern RNA vaccines. There's two things that really happen with a placebo. The one thing with a placebo is we know the placebo effect, and that's what made it famous, is this idea that, mind-body healing, we know it exists because the placebo effect exists. And so, with drugs, they have to go against the placebo, and the placebo, oftentimes we hear, has a 50% success rate curing the patient. That's because people that believe that they're getting the drug actually heal because of their belief system. This is something I've always had it was one of my biggest problems when I worked on the medical talk show, The Doctors, was every time I'd be talking to a doctor, and I even have one in our family, my wife's uncle, a big chemist that's been involved in some big drugs. He would talk about the placebo as though it was like this dark Sith or Lord that he's got to beat. I got to beat the placebo. And we came close, but we only beat it by 5%. I need to get 50% above the placebo. And I just thought how amazing it is that, and how stupid or small-minded it seems to me that modern medicine really only treats the placebo as its enemy. Whereas it seems to me that great science would be saying, why does the placebo work? If a placebo healed 50% in the placebo group, so meaning their own minds were able to heal 50% of them, why do we never hear about studies how to increase the placebo effect? How do we increase that mind-body connection, right? We know it's there. Why do we only treat it as the enemy? But that's sort of getting off course, but that's something that I've always found fascinating. It seems to me intelligent science would say, let's try to harness that power. It never does. It just keeps it sequestered in a back room, and it goes into that back room to test against it, and then leaves it locked up there and comes back out to the public. But with vaccines, there's also another process with placebos, and that is simply to test safety, not whether the product, that's an efficacy placebo, right? Is it more efficacious than believing you're taking the product? Right. That's one study, but safety is totally different. And you really could learn a lot from having people injected with an RNA vaccine and people injected with a saline injection. They don't know who got what. You're not going to learn a lot in 6 weeks, which is how long we're being told this process is going to last.
Wow.
Because then it's like, then all you're looking at is, were you sore in your arm? Did you get a little bit like feverish like 2 days after? We're talking about RNA, meaning, and by the way, the number one injuries written on every vaccine we take, they're all autoimmune diseases, right? Lupus and multiple sclerosis or diabetes. These are conditions that take years to develop. We have never, and this is what we proved in my nonprofit, there's never been a study that used an inert placebo to establish safety for any of the 16 vaccines we give our kids. But even more alarming is whatever they did call a safety study, like, for instance, hepatitis B given to a day one old baby, It was 4 days long or 5 days. There's two products, Sanofi's and Merck's. 5 day safety trial. What were you going to find are the long term effects of this? So, RNA vaccines, as we pointed out, could very well have incredible mutating effects on your genes that could lead to future cancers. God knows what it could do to you. But when I say I still think a placebo study would work, it will if we follow you 5 to 10 years. If we
Right.
were watching 10 years, we had 10,000 people that got a saline injection and 10,000 people that got the RNA vaccine, who had more cancer, who had more diabetes, who had more multiple sclerosis, who had more autism or ADD, ADHD, or how about when they get older, who had more Parkinson's or Alzheimer's? I mean, these are all questions science can answer if it takes the time. But when the manufacturers are the ones doing all of the safety trials, which is the case, who wants to take the time? Who even wants to find that there's a problem? Their goal is to prove there isn't one. And that goal is made easier by the shorter the amount of time the study lasts. And if we have no placebo to compare against at all, even better.
And the thing that I'm really interested in knowing, Del, specifically with this new type of DNA, affecting vaccine, what happens when someone has that vaccine as a baby and then they become an adult and they procreate with someone else who's had the vaccine versus someone else who hasn't had the vaccine? I mean, we're talking about genetic changes. What happens to their offspring? What happens to the next generation of offspring? I mean, this could be the biggest human health disaster in the history of mankind. They're playing with fire, literally. And Alan Dershowitz certainly doesn't know what the outcome will be. For him to advocate for it is maniacal. So I want people to take away from this that they should not be scared. They shouldn't be concerned. Alan Dershowitz is not the president. He's not the Director General of the World Health Organization. He is not the Supreme Court Chief Justice. He is an individual expressing his legal opinion. And I do need to say one thing in my defense. During your conversation with him, he tried to minimize what he said by explaining to you that he wasn't prepared to answer that question and that I had sprung it on him, trying to sort of indicate that I had done something journalistically unethical or tricked him into something. This is totally untrue. I was asking him about Andrew Cuomo's constitutional rights, whether it was constitutional or not, for Cuomo to determine that we can't peacefully assemble to protest the lockdowns, which I would also say, Del, are not protected by this Police Powers Act for the same reasons the vaccine is not. Nobody has proven that standing 6 feet away from somebody is going to get them sick. So they're basically doing this in an arbitrary fashion. And in the Police Powers Act, it specifically says that it cannot be applied arbitrarily. So I want people to understand that when lawyers, when Alan Dershowitz, when anyone makes a legal argument, it's just that. It's their opinion of the legal ruling. And when you look at the police powers here, it says it may not be exercised arbitrarily or in an oppressive fashion, and there must be a real and substantial relation to an end that is public, specifically the public health, safety, or morals. And the other great point that you raised in your conversation with Bobby Kennedy Jr. is that there are a ton of health effects associated with the tangible, measurable economic disaster that the poor decisions related to the handling of COVID-19 have definitely caused. That's scary.
Absolutely. And now, once again, we're hearing, Anthony Fauci now start to express some of those things. I mean, the guy is amazing, right? I mean, I always say, if you don't like what Fauci's saying, just wait a minute. I mean, he's absolutely covered the board with whatever you want to say. He's covered it. He'll always be able to say, hey, I told you that, amongst a million other, diametrically opposing positions. But first of all, I want to thank you for doing what people don't realize they can do. You just reached out to Alan Dershowitz and you got that interview. And you asked really sensible questions. And it seemed to me that he interjected himself into the vaccine discussion on his own, right? You were asking a fairly general idea. You didn't nail him on, I'm leading up to hit him on vaccinations. He sort of submitted that himself. And he went a step further, which is really where I decided to debate him. It's fine if you're going to say, look, my expert opinion is one of the great trial attorneys alive on the planet. is that the Supreme Court would be able to uphold this. And he's a professor of law, I believe at Harvard Law School. I mean, this guy's a real deal. He knows how to teach on these things. All of that's okay. That's your expert opinion. But he took it a step further, really took it off the charts the moment he said, I hope when we have a coronavirus vaccine that they do mandate that law and they do take upon themselves this police power to drag you to a hospital and plunge a vaccine into your arm. And even further than that, I would love to be the lawyer that defends that all the way to the Supreme Court. And I caught him several times trying to make it about, legislators are going to make the decision. Or the science says this. I said, no, I'm not interested in that, Alan. You have a big voice, as you pointed out here, too. And you can scare people, you can empower people, but you have a voice that people listen to, and you stated a very clear opinion beyond your expert opinion in law. You made a medical decision for people, and you said you would like to see this level of force brought upon America. Therefore, I think we have to have a clearer understanding of what you know about the vaccines and what you've thought through and to put together that opinion. And I think one of the things that we can say you don't really need to be afraid of is how little it appears he had thought through when I finally got to pick up on the conversation, start asking very reasonable questions. And in the end, I think he did admit, I learned some things here. He said, this is a debate that should be happening. I've even language a little bit with Tucker Carlson moments after really I interviewed him. He's now saying I wouldn't immediately force it on children. We'd have to make it safe for other groups. So doesn't mean that he's changed it altogether, but he certainly is adjusting his conversation because he realized he hadn't thought it through. And what I was trying to show people, and I think you did the same thing, is we made boogeymen out of these people. And when people knew I was going to interview him, take him out, tell this guy's a scourge of the earth and blah, 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 and all these things. I just want to show you, actually, he's just a human being, right? He's a human being with an opinion. And we know, human beings, opinions are like a-holes. Everyone's got one. And, so you really find that, right? It's scary. I'm sure you were a little nervous sitting down with Alan Dershowitz. Everyone's thinking, what's a conversation where I'm going to challenge one of the great, lawyers of all times? But as soon as you're in it, it's like any doctor I've talked to or any immunologist, you immediately find out that they really have not thought this through to the level we're all assuming. And that's what has to end in this country. You have got to stop assuming that someone who is an authority figure has actually read all of the evidence or even understands what they're talking about. Challenge them. And that's what I say to reporters that attack me, all the time. A New York Times reporter recently was saying, Del, you're going against the science. This is before COVID-19, right before it. But she said the consensus says and experts say that vaccines are safe and effective. What do you have to say to that? I said, well, what I have to say to that is I'm a journalist. I'm fine. I do know that a body of experts say that. But see, I don't think my job is to just accept what they say. My job is to say, great, I heard that. Please provide me the evidence that brings you to that conclusion. What makes you say it's safe? Let me see that. And I said to this reporter, I said, I know you haven't done that. I know you have never read the scientific studies around the safety of childhood vaccines. She's like, that's quite a presumption to make, though. I was like, no, it isn't if you've researched this the way I have, because I'm telling you, if you had read these studies, if you had gone beyond just writing what the expert opinion is and said, show me the proof, that's the only difference between you and I. I went and read their proof, and I'm telling you it's not there. And I'm telling you, you would not be interviewing me the same way had you read it, because anybody with a working brain cell can see very early on that they are not telling the truth, and most of the time don't even know what they're talking about, but the science doesn't back it up. You know what she said? Well, you're right in that I haven't read any of the studies. It's like, I know I'm right. It's not, I'm not trying to be a jerk. There's no way you can have your opinion and have read the science. And that's true for, I would love to sit with Neil deGrasse Tyson. You are defending terrible science. You're out there saying, it's ridiculous that people challenge this vaccine science. I know for a fact that Neil deGrasse Tyson hasn't read it. You're too smart a guy. You're too smart a guy to be making as emphatic a statements as I've heard you make and defending a science that is so deplorable that lacks all of the gold standards of safety studies, lacks control groups, messes up timing issues, contents that it never admits it has. I mean, the whole thing, you know, it's just people need to look at it. And so you're right. People shouldn't be afraid. These
Yeah.
figures make statements. These people make statements with very little knowledge about what they're actually talking about.
And you know what, Del? I know exactly what you're talking about right now because I happen to be watching an old Larry King interview where comedian Rob Schneider was speaking to Larry King. And it was clear that Rob Schneider knows a lot about vaccines and vaccine injuries and the science. I have never heard Rob Schneider speak more intelligently than he did in this. And not to say that I don't think he's intelligent. I just have only ever seen him on Saturday Night Live. But this is obviously a guy who's looked into it. He says, you know, he's in LA. You're in LA, I think. And, you know, you get a lot of opposition in California when you talk about this. It's one of the most aggressive states with the mandatory vaccination. It's a big deal.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Before I got involved in all this, but when it was all starting to spark, I looked up some videos on the vaccine issue right when I was starting to investigate William Thompson, the whistleblower at the CDC. And I saw a few moments where Rob Schneider was once caught by a news camera outside of a courtroom, the Larry King piece. And I have to say, I was astounded at how eloquent he was. Not because I know him as Deuce Bigelow, but
Yeah.
he was like incredibly articulate for any
Yes.
regular person that's not a doctor. And I've had the opportunity to meet. It was intimidating to ever think I could go out there and speak. I never thought I would be able to be as clearly spoken on the issue as you, Rob, and he did a brilliant job there. But you know, one of the reasons he's not doing podcasts like this right now is he is being censored. He's being told by anyone that wants to make a film or anyone in that we will, his agents, everybody, we will not touch you if you get involved in this vaccine issue.
Wow.
They're making it essentially, you know, career ending to discuss a product that's, you know, lightly tested, injected into children. I mean, it's just the bullying part of this. And look, he's just an actor. I've met scientists that are losing their credentials or losing their you know, university positions simply for doing scientific studies to ask questions like this.
Wow.
Dr. Chris Exley in the UK. I mean, that guy never was anti-vaccine. He's been studying aluminum his entire career, knows more about aluminum than anyone alive. But the moment he dissected the brains of autistic children and people and found the highest level of aluminum ever recorded, he's suddenly anti-vaccine. He's suddenly a quack. I mean, we've got to stop allowing that type of bullying of people that are doing what they feel guided and what their talents lead them to do.
And this type of professional ostracization is exactly what you experienced when you were working for CBS at the Doctors, right? And that's what led you to producing the film Vaxxed and then ultimately creating your own show, The High Wire, which Crowdsource the Truth viewers can get to by just searching for The High Wire with Del Bigtree on YouTube, 165,000 subscribers and growing. So it's exciting to know that we can at least use social media to try to get this word out, but the censorship is happening everywhere. You've done a lot of work with Bobby Kennedy Jr.
Yeah.
He told Mike Moore of True Pundit that even though Bobby Kennedy had a almost lifelong friendship with Roger Ailes at Fox News wouldn't have Mr. Kennedy on there because 70% of their advertising revenue, which runs the whole place, comes from the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah. I mean, and I think people know that they're starting to really get a sense of that now, right? They're wondering why they're just getting sort of one side of the story with no real math or evidence, or I think people are waking up to that, but that's the truth. You know, if you're looking to your television, even Fox is getting a substantial amount of its funding from, you know, the pharmaceutical industry. It's been nice to watch Tucker Carlson break out a little bit, and a few others. And, you know, what you recognize is we're not really seeing what these people care about. We're seeing what they have to, you know, this is not the world you live in. It's the world that the industries that are advertising want us to believe we live in. And so all of that is very problematic. and you do get ostracized, and you cannot be in television. And we are lucky to have social media. But I was just saying something very interesting to a reporter right before I got on here with you, and they said, "Well, how much are you growing?" I was like, "How much is COVID-19 affecting the growth of your work in this movement?" I said, "It's exponential, and I think we're 25 times bigger in
Wow.
our viewership than we were 3 months ago, right at the beginning of COVID-19." We only started, I think, at YouTube. We were had a 20,000 maybe subscribers when this year started. So you can sort of see that growth has been really fast. Facebook, I mean, we've gone really from hundreds of thousands of views a week to millions of views a week in the work that we're doing. But I said to her, that is all happening while we are the most censored conversation there is on social
Right.
media. You know what I mean? There is no
Yeah.
algorithm working in my favor. There is no one that's getting a pop-up saying, hey, if you like what Jason Goodman says, you may want to check out Del Bigtree's The High Wire. That's what's happening for every other conversation in social media, but not us. We are getting, in fact, we have algorithms hunting out the word vaccine, hunting out, the word, WHO, and trying to shut down people's ability to even share what we're doing. And under those circumstances, we are exponentially growing right now, which shows the absolute desire and awakening that's taking place. Can you imagine where we would be, Jason, if the internet, social media, YouTube, and Facebook worked for us the way it works for everybody else, or how it worked, when I first started? When we first put out our first little what was it? Paris video, I think is where it started. Vax had just released, that technology just came online. We held up a camera and started interviewing parents outside of the movie theater. It used to be that if you had a video that hit, let's say 30,000 views by the evening, 4 hours later, you would wake up to 1 million views. And, 5 days later, you're in tens of millions of views.
Yeah.
I go to bed now on your average high wire show with 180,000 views to 200,000 views. When I go to bed, it's on its way to Australia. They're about to wake up, and I wake up the next morning to 225,000 views. That's
Wow.
impossible. That's impossible. It's impossible to have hundreds of thousands of people all sharing something, and you only grow 20,000 views the next day. These are the things we're up against, is what I'm saying, and still they cannot hold us back. I have videos that are censored. I get flags thousands every day and every week.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean, you brought up Fox News. There was a really interesting piece, a follow-up that Alan Dershowitz did on Tucker Carlson. I think it's interesting to notice some details about it. They kind of obscured my logo. They definitely muted my voice. And I don't care about getting credit. I don't care about being known on Fox News. I just observe some of the subtle things. See, I'm speaking in opposition to Dershowitz there, but they cut that out. They promote his book. They give him an opportunity to kind of like backpedal on what he said to me. I don't know if people are fully aware. Fox News is owned by News Corp, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, who is also the principal in this Murdoch Children's Research Institute, which is itself developing a vaccine for COVID-19. So there are all these really questionable conflicts of interest that arise around some of these things. And it's part of the reason, Del, why I've tried to create a system where I don't have corporate sponsors. It's the same problem you ran into, The viewers are the sponsors here. So that's a big and important difference. I know you're very busy, Del, and you've been generous with your time here. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss today?
Well, I think that really what people need to recognize is the opportunity of this moment. And you spoke about fear and getting pumped up and afraid of what Alan Dershowitz was saying. And really, my message is all of this had to happen. You and I have been at conferences together over the last couple of years. I've been standing on stages saying, people, you need to wake up now. The pharmaceutical industry is the most powerful lobby in Washington. It's outspending oil and gas 2-1. We're fighting wars in the Middle East for oil and gas, and pharma is giving our government twice that. What do you think it is they want? And I said, and they're doing this around the world. I was at Anarchapulco right before this all, really kicked into gear, and I said, Pharma is going to attempt to take over the governments of the world. It is going to attempt to create a forced vaccination program that will involve identifying you if you don't have vaccinations. And all of those things would have been considered conspiracy theories, right? The idea that the
Yes.
world wants to vaccinate you and that they're going to have ID cards that track you. Well, let me be perfectly clear now. I may have been a conspiracy theorist last year, but now Bill Gates is telling you he wants everybody to get the vaccine. Anthony Fauci and world leaders are saying you will not get out of your life imprisonment here until we have a vaccine, meaning you're going to have to take that vaccine if you want to have the freedom you once knew. And we're looking at, Silicon Valley saying we don't even need the ID anymore. We've got a microchip we can inject into you. We have our phones are now being traced, meaning who were we meeting with? How long were we with them? How close were we? Did we kiss? Did we hug? Is that legal in the state that I live in? All of these things seem like crazy conspiracy theories. They seem like science fiction novels, but now it's coming from the mouths of very important people around the country and around the world. So let's be perfectly clear. This is no longer a theory. They are saying it themselves. They want to force vaccinate you. They want to track you. They want to bring in drones from China to fly over you and check your temperature. They want, and pharma is going to decide what you need in order to get on a plane or get a driver's license. They're probably going to microchip you. All of those things are no longer theories. They're saying it. And now let's deal with the word conspiracy. Conspiracy simply means a small group of people with an agenda for the larger body of people. And that's exactly what you're seeing in Bill Gates, a couple of scientists at the WHO, Tony Fauci and the like. But if you look, I know you have, Jason, I have, the body of science disagrees with this lockdown, has disagreed with it from the beginning. The body of mathematicians and great modelers have been saying the imperial model needs to be looked at. Why haven't we seen it? And now that they've seen it, they're saying it's a disaster of the greatest kind. So the body of science, the body of intelligent people do not agree with where this country is being led to by this conspiracy group, this small group of people that have a dream of forced vaccinations, a dream of social tracking, a dream of making our children terrified to breathe the air, to wear masks to school if they're over the age of 2. Remember, when we think about those great, hypochondriacs throughout history that, couldn't breathe the air, or the OCD can't touch the doorknob. That is how the people that we're allowing to make decisions for us think. That's how they want to train our children to think. And all I have to say is this. We knew this moment was coming. I said this was going to be the battleground. The moment they try to bring the adult vaccine, they're going to try and scare you into it. I didn't know what it was, but that's what they're doing. Here's the beauty of it. They really are just a conspiracy. We outnumber them. And we're smarter than them. We have more scientists. We have more lawyers. We have more people on our side than we've ever had before. And for all the conversations about settled science and the consensus, there is no settled science around COVID-19, and they're nowhere near having a consensus, which means this land grab is a disaster for them. And it's the weakest point we've ever seen in the medical establishment. And for those of us that have been fighting this for a very long time, the giant is stumbling. We all need to work together now to drop insanity to the ground, to take this small conspiracy group that has this sick vision of our future that lacks all freedom, is an absolute defiance against our founding fathers and what this nation represents and other democratic nations like ours around the world. This had to happen. We are the ones in control. We are the ones in the offensive. I have no fear of Alan Dershowitz, as I proved by sitting down with him, and so did you. We fear none of these people because we're right. And we're on the right side of history. And I truly believe history will tell this story correctly, and it will ask, how were so many people hoodwinked for as long as they were? Why did it take such to militarize your lifestyle? Why is that what it took? It doesn't matter. Just know that in the end, we prevail. I really believe that.
Del, that's so well said. Thank you so much for that. I want to leave you with one thought along the lines of the conspiracy that you're talking about, because I do believe that Alan Dershowitz revealed something very important in his interview with you relative to my interview with him, and I think it was something of a Freudian slip. He was totally incorrect when he said that I blindsided him, I sprung that question on him. I think he was referring to questions about Jeffrey Epstein, and he may have felt that those were not pertinent to the constitutional questions being raised relative to COVID-19. But you raised the concept of an actual conspiracy, a group of more than one person, two or more people working together to achieve a goal, possibly one that is illegal. And I asked him about Jeffrey Epstein, not just because he was his former attorney, which frankly I was perplexed that he didn't simply say, attorney-client privilege survives the death of the client, and I don't want to talk about that. Let's focus on the Constitution and coronavirus. I was asking him about Jeffrey Epstein because Bill Gates has revealed, reluctantly, that he was much closer to Jeffrey Epstein than what was originally believed. And Jeffrey Epstein has been photographed at Harvard with Larry Summers, with Alan Dershowitz, and I wanted to ask about some of the science that's going on at Harvard, including the Wyss Institute, Charles Lieber. These are experts in nanotechnology, and nanotechnology plays a major role in modern vaccines. It can do things that were science fiction, I mean, for me, 3 weeks ago until I found out about this, but they can actually put what they call DNA robots into your body, which are smaller than viruses themselves. And it causes me to ask, could they engineer a DNA robot that acts like a virus to create this whole situation? Alan Dershowitz was telling us, you got to get tracked, you got to get vaxxed, you got to get tracked, or else you can live the rest of your life locked in your apartment under house arrest, according to Alan Dershowitz.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely crazy. You know, I've seen this conversation come up. I've also sat across from, I've been in meetings with Tony Fauci and Francis Collins of the NIH, Bobby Kennedy. I've had some great meetings set up, one specifically by Donald Trump. And, you know, my feeling is these people aren't nearly as intelligent as we give them credit for. And there may be nanotechnologies they're working on. I've heard people say they control you with 5G and the nanotechnologies. I could be wrong. I haven't met anyone intelligent enough to pull off any of the sort. They're still trying to figure out how your immune system works. They're still trying to figure out, you know, do the T cells really matter more than the antigens that we've been creating with vaccines? So many questions that they can't even answer for themselves. But it does lead to the greater question, which is, why would you ever give any government, the power to inject you with products you have no control over? I don't need nanotechnology to be my concern. There's a program I saw in a newspaper where we vaccinate deer to sterilize them because there's an outbreak of too many deer in certain populations.
Wow.
That should trigger something in you, right? That means we can use a vaccine that sterilizes. We know that this has happened, at least it's alleged to have happened because of samples that were brought out of Africa, where they were using a vaccine on women that was sterilizing those women. Now,
HPV.
Right, yeah. So, actually, no, it was a tetanus vaccine specifically. There was a tetanus vaccine that was given in 5 doses. The only vaccine ever made that was 5 doses was actually one designed to sterilize. And the Catholic priests that were involved in the processes started wondering, why is it we're only giving it to women? I've never heard of tetanus being a problem. And they discovered that it had proteins that are known to cause sterilization in women. Whether or not that is what we're using it for. The fact is you could sterilize someone with the vaccine. That technology exists. And we now know because of this antibody immune enhancement that happened in the animals, you could make a vaccine where it looks like it's perfectly safe. And then as soon as the person comes in contact with the cold virus, they die. Their body has an overreaction. I'm obviously reverse engineering what we know from the animal trials, but that's what we discovered. They discovered, wow, this vaccine did the opposite. It made the animal more sick and died when we gave it to them, but they looked perfectly healthy. Can you imagine if someone, and this is the last point I want to make, what I think is the point for all of our society, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, I say this, I lived in college. I actually moved to Texas. You asked. I just recently moved to
Wow.
Texas out of California, so I am
Well
a
done.
refugee out of California now. Uh, but I would say this about California: a lot of people in California that are African American or Latino believe that Donald Trump hates them, that he is a racist. I have met gays, bis, lesbian, transgender that believe that Donald Trump does not want them to exist. And what I would say to them is, then why would you ever give Donald Trump the ability to inject something into your body? Now, remember, I'm not saying Donald Trump is those things, but there is a giant part of our population that actually believes that a bad actor has been elected. I believe a bad actor can be elected for sure. And why would you ever give that leader the ability to reject people he doesn't like, races or religions he doesn't like, or social life preferences? Why would you give that person that you think hates you the ability to inject you? Because let me make this perfectly clear. Your vaccine program is designed by the CDC, the FDA, the National Institute of Health, and Health and Human Services. Guess who puts in the presidents and heads of the NIH, the CDC, the FDA? No, you never voted for that. The president does. So when you give that power of injections into your body and the bodies of your children, you should think about the fact, am I sure that the president that will decide that program through who he puts in place of those agencies, am I sure we will never, ever elect someone that doesn't want to see my people thrive?
Right.
If you can't answer that question with an affirmative, yeah, presidents are always going to care about me and my people, then you should be against forced vaccination of any kind.
Absolutely, Dell. And along the lines of what you were saying with sterilization, Professor Dershowitz referenced this Buck v. Bell, where the
Yeah.
same law that he's defending allowed for compulsory sterilization of the unfit, including the intellectually disabled. And this was a determination that was made by vote. So I'm not sure if Alan Dershowitz wants to leave the majority to decide his fate as to whether or not he's intellectually suitable to carry on his genetic material. It's not the type of country I want to live in. But Del, I have to thank you for spending this time with us today. You're an absolute champion for health, for safety, for people's personal rights. And it's been my pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much, and best of luck with everything that you're doing.
My pleasure too, Jason. Keep up the great work, and I'll see you at the finish line.
Absolutely. Thank you, Del, and thanks everybody for watching. Have a great day, and I'll be back tonight with a truly chilling case of medical kidnapping with somebody you all know. See you then.